Have you ever heard the story of Persephone, the goddess who lives between the light of spring and the shadows of the underworld? But what if I told you that what we know about her is just the tip of the iceberg? There's a secret behind her abduction, something the gods prefer to keep hidden, and today you're going to uncover it all. What really happened when Hades, the god of the underworld, took Persephone? And how does this story affect the balance between life and death? Stay with me until the end, because we're going to reveal the mystery that still resonates through the seasons. Get ready for a revealing journey behind the myth. Long before mortals ruled the earth, the gods shaped the world to their will. High atop Mount Olympus, Zeus, the mighty king of the gods, was known not only for his strength, but also for his countless affairs. Among those lovers was Demeter, the goddess of the harvest and fertility, whose domain ensured the fields were always green and the grains always plentiful. From this union came Persephone, a child who seemed different from the start. Her laugh was like the sound of crystal-clear waters, and her eyes sparkled like golden fields at sunset. Wherever she went, nature seemed to respond. Flowers bloomed, trees grew greener, and the wind blew softer. But despite her joy, Demeter felt a tightness in her chest. She knew that nothing in the world of the gods came without consequences. There was something about Persephone, a light so pure that seemed to attract the gaze of the immortals. To protect her, Demeter decided that no one, not even the other gods, could come near her daughter. She erected barriers around the girl, kept her away from Olympus, and never allowed her to venture out alone. Persephone grew up surrounded by her mother's love, but unaware of the world beyond the fields and flowers that surrounded her. She didn't know that soon her destiny would take an unexpected turn, one that would change not only her life, but the balance between the worlds. As the years passed, Persephone flourished, like the fertile lands Demeter so fiercely protected. But despite her beauty and joy, she lived in a world carefully controlled by Demeter. The goddess feared that any shadow from Olympus or the underworld would approach her daughter, so she kept her hidden from the eyes of the other gods. Persephone grew up surrounded only by nymphs and spirits of nature, far from the grand festivities of Olympus and the intrigues of the gods. Her world was limited to blooming fields, crystal-clear streams, and the warmth of the sun on her skin. Though it was a beautiful and safe environment, the young girl began to feel something she had never dared to voice: curiosity. As she walked through the fields, she saw birds crossing the sky without restrictions, felt the wind coming from distant lands, and heard the whispers of the nymphs about stories of places she would never know. Inside her, a desire grew that she couldn't fully understand. The desire to see what lay beyond those fields, to know who else inhabited the vast world of the gods. Demeter, however, noticed the signs of unrest in her daughter. Each dreamy glance from Persephone was a warning that she needed to strengthen her protection. The goddess began to watch her even more closely, always warning about the dangers lurking beyond the flowers. "The world is not safe for you, my daughter," she would say. "Stay here where you are protected. But fate is capricious, and no wall, no matter how strong, can contain a spirit yearning for freedom." Something was about to happen. Something that would change the course of Persephone's life forever. And not even Demeter could prevent it. While Persephone lived surrounded by her mother's protection, Olympus was preparing for a grand celebration. The gods had defeated Typhon, the most terrifying creature to ever threaten their dominion. And now they were celebrating their victory with a magnificent banquet. In the vast golden hall of Zeus's palace, tables overflowed with nectar and ambrosia. Music echoed through marble columns, nymphs danced under the light of torches, and the gods chatted animatedly, celebrating their triumph. Among the guests, an unusual presence caught attention: Hades, the lord of the underworld. It was rare to See him at the festivities of Olympus as he ruled a distant and gloomy realm where few dared to go. But that night, he decided to attend. Hades walked among the gods in silence, not engaging in the laughter or conversations. His gaze was as cold as the darkness he ruled, and his presence, though discreet, kept even the immortals on edge. It was then that something caught his attention. In the middle of the hall, laughing innocently, was Persephone. Demeter, ever vigilant, had never allowed her daughter to attend events like this, but through a mistake or a brief concession, Persephone was there, admiring the splendor of Olympus, with her eyes sparkling in awe. Hades froze. He had seen many goddesses, but none like her. There was something about Persephone that captivated him, something he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just her beauty, but the light that seemed to surround her, the sweetness in her gaze, the way her laughter brought life to the atmosphere. For a moment, all the noise of the party faded away. For Hades, there was only her, and it was in that moment that he knew he could no longer forget her. Hades was not an impulsive god. Unlike his brothers, Zeus and Poseidon, he did not give in to fleeting passions or desires. He ruled the underworld with discipline and justice, keeping himself apart from the intrigues of Olympus. But that night, something within him changed. As the party continued, he remained at a distance, watching Persephone. It wasn't just her beauty that fascinated him, but the way she seemed different from the other gods. She didn't flaunt power or arrogance. Her laughter was sincere, and her eyes sparkled with curiosity and innocence, without the coldness typical of immortals. For the first time in ages, Hades felt something new. A quiet, deep desire grew within him like a seed taking root. He wanted to know her. He wanted to hear her voice, understand her thoughts, and discover what made her heart beat faster. But he also knew this would be impossible. Demeter would never allow her daughter to approach him. To everyone, Hades was the lord of the dead, a feared and distant king, someone no one would choose willingly. Still, something inside him told him that this encounter was no accident. Persephone, with her gentle light, had awakened something in the god of the underworld, something he could not ignore. And as the gods toasted and celebrated, Hades made a silent decision. He would not let Persephone disappear from his life so easily. After the banquet, Hades returned to the underworld, but his mind remained on Olympus. The thought of Persephone would not leave him. No matter how hard he tried to focus on his duties, the image of the young goddess remained vivid in his mind. Her smile, her gaze full of curiosity, the lightness with which she moved. He knew he couldn't just appear before her and ask for her attention. Demeter would never allow it. The goddess of the harvest guarded her as a hawk protects its chick, keeping her away from any external influence. Hades pondered his options. He could ignore this feeling and continue ruling his realm as he always had. But the mere thought of never seeing her again seemed unbearable. So he made the only decision he considered sensible, to ask Zeus for permission. The king of the gods was, after all, Persephone's father. If anyone could decide her future, it was him. Thus, Hades climbed back to Olympus and found Zeus on his throne, watching the world below with his imposing expression. "Brother," Hades began, his deep voice echoing through the hall, "I need to speak with you about Persephone." Zeus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What about my daughter?" Hades hesitated for a moment, but then decided to speak plainly. "I want to take her as my wife." For a brief moment there was silence. Zeus did not show surprise, but his eyes sparkled with a mix of interest and caution. "You know Demeter will never allow this," he said, crossing his arms. "I know," Hades replied firmly. "But Persephone deserves more than a life confined. In the underworld, she would have the freedom to grow, to become queen at my side. I would treat her with respect and give her a place of honor." Zeus remained silent, weighing his brother's words. He knew Hades was not cruel, as many thought. However, he also knew that challenging Demeter would not be simple. Finally, he sighed. If you want Persephone, you will have to take her without Demeter's permission, because she will never agree. Hades lowered his gaze for a moment, reflecting. He had expected this response, and if Zeus did not oppose, it meant he would not intervene if something were done without Demeter's consent. Persephone's fate was sealed. Hades left Olympus with a plan already formed in his mind. He couldn't wait for Persephone to come to him willingly, so he would have to find her another way. Hades returned to the underworld with one certainty. If he waited for Demeter's approval, he would never have Persephone by his side. He needed to act. For days, he reflected on the best way to bring her to his realm. He didn't want to hurt or scare her, but he knew that if he simply invited her, she would refuse. After all, Persephone had grown up hearing that the underworld was a dark place and that Hades was a distant and terrifying figure, so he began to observe. Through the shadows that connected the realms, Hades sent his specters to watch Persephone from afar. He wanted to understand her routine, her habits, to find when she would be most vulnerable to his approach. That's when he noticed something curious. Whenever she escaped her mother's supervision, Persephone ran to the flowery fields, where she felt free. There, far from Demeter's watchful eye, she picked flowers and played with the nymphs. It was the only time she wasn't under her mother's obsessive protection. It was there that Hades would make his move. But he couldn't act alone. For everything to go as planned, he needed to ensure that Zeus remained silent and that Demeter didn't suspect anything until it was too late. So, in the dead of night, he returned to Olympus for a secret meeting with his brother. "I need your help," Hades said, his voice firm. Zeus, already knowing what he intended, gave a sideways smile. "Have you made up your mind then?" "Yes, but I want to avoid a direct conflict with Demeter. If you can delay her, give me time. I guarantee that Persephone will be treated like a queen." Zeus was silent for a moment, pondering. He knew it would have consequences, but he also knew that opposing Hades wasn't an option. Besides, perhaps it would be better for Persephone than living forever under her mother's shadow. Finally, Zeus nodded. "I'll take care of it. But what will you do when Persephone is in the underworld?" Hades looked at the starry sky and answered with conviction, "I'll show her that I'm more than just the Lord of the dead." The next morning, Persephone walked carefree through the fields, unaware that beneath her feet the earth was already preparing to open the way to the underworld. The sun was high in the sky when Persephone stepped away from the nymphs and ventured alone into the flowery field. She knelt among the plants, admiring a rare flower with golden petals that she had never seen before. Fascinated, she reached out to pick it. The instant her fingers touched the flower, the earth trembled beneath her feet. The ground cracked with a deep rumble, and before she could react, a dark chasm opened in front of her. A cold wind escaped from the depths, carrying with it an eerie silence. And then he appeared. Hades emerged from the shadows in his black chariot, pulled by spectral horses whose hooves made no sound as they touched the ground. His cloak billowed around his body, and his eyes shone with an unknown intensity. Time seemed to slow down for Persephone. She tried to run, but before she could take a step, Hades extended his hand and with a firm motion seized her wrist. "And don't be afraid," he said, his voice deep yet calm. But how could she not fear? The world around her was crumbling, the flowers swallowed by darkness, and the sunlight seemed distant. The nymphs screamed in the distance, calling for help, but nothing could stop what had already been done. Before Persephone could scream, the chariot sped toward the abyss. The earth closed behind them with a rumble, erasing any trace of what had happened, and then everything went dark. Only the sound of the horse's hooves echoed in the void, mixed with Persephone's rapid breathing. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her body trembled. But something inside her told her that this moment would change her fate forever. As they descended into the depths of the underworld, Persephone looked at the man beside her. Hades wasn't smiling, but he didn't have the cruel expression she had imagined either. His eyes were fixed on the path ahead, but his hand still held hers, not with force, not with violence, but with a firmness that told her he would never let her go. And so the daughter of spring disappeared from the world of the living, unaware that her journey was just beginning. The wind carried a strange silence when Demeter arrived at the field where Persephone should have been. The sun still shone, but the flowers looked wilted, and the nymphs were gathered in a corner, their faces pale with fear. "Where is my daughter?" Demeter's voice sounded like thunder. The nymphs exchanged hesitant glances until one of them, with tears in her eyes, finally answered, "The earth." The earth opened and she disappeared. Demeter felt the ground falter beneath her feet. Her heart tightened in her chest as if an invisible hand was crushing it. She ran through the field, calling for Persephone, but there was no sign of her daughter, only silence and the disturbed earth, as if something monstrous had emerged from there. She knelt and touched the cold ground. No. Despair began to take over her chest. She sprang to her feet and raced across the world, asking every god, every nymph, every spirit of nature if they had seen her daughter. But no one knew, or if they did, they were too afraid to speak. Days passed, and Demeter did not rest. She wandered the earth like a shadow, refusing to return to Olympus until she found Persephone. Her pain turned to anger, and her anger turned to grief. Without her divine touch to care for the crops, the earth began to wither. The soil dried, the plants died, and hunger spread among the mortals. Still, nothing mattered to Demeter but finding her daughter. "If the gods won't help me, let the mortals suffer with my pain," she shouted, refusing to bring fertility back to the world. The fields remained barren, the grains didn't sprout, and men began to fear that the end was near. But Demeter didn't care. Nothing made sense without Persephone, and she was willing to turn the world upside down to bring her back. While Demeter wandered the world, consumed by grief, Persephone awoke in the most unexpected place of all, the underworld. The air there was different. Dense, cold, almost palpable. There was no sun, only a pale glow that seemed to emanate from the black rock walls. The ground beneath her feet was solid, but there was a soft echo with every step she took. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the distant sound of running water and muffled whispers. Persephone felt a shiver run down her spine. Everything there was so different from the fertile, colorful land where she had grown up. But what scared her most wasn't the place, but the presence watching her. Hades was there, just a few steps from her, watching her closely. His gaze wasn't cruel or triumphant, but it carried an intensity that made her uneasy. "You are safe," he said, his voice sounding like the underworld itself. Deep, yet strangely comforting. Safe. Persephone wanted to scream, to demand answers, to run away. But part of her knew there was nowhere to run. And as much as she wanted to deny it, there was something intriguing in the way he looked at her. Not as a jailer, but as someone who hoped to be understood. "You brought me here against my will." Her voice came out firmer than she expected. Hades didn't look away. "I brought you here because I wanted you by my side, but I am not your enemy, Persephone. Here, you are not a prisoner." She laughed humorlessly. "Then what am I?" Hades remained silent for a moment, then gestured with his hand. The great doors of the hall opened, revealing something she hadn't expected. The underworld wasn't just shadows and suffering. There were grand structures, pale flower gardens that glowed in the dark, crystal-clear water fountains that reflected like mirrors, and souls walking silently, some looking peaceful, others carrying heavy stories. It was a kingdom, a true empire, and at the center of it all was him. "I want you to see this place with your own eyes," Hades said. "I want you to understand that there is more here than just darkness." Persephone didn't know what to say. Everything inside her screamed that she should hate him. But as she looked around, a doubt began to grow within her. The underworld was a mystery, and she was starting to realize that Hades was too. As the days passed, Persephone began, strangely, to get used to the rhythm of the underworld. At first, she felt like an intruder, a visitor in a place where she didn't belong. But Hades, contrary to what she had expected, wasn't a merciless monster. He gave her the freedom to explore, to learn about his kingdom, and little by little, he revealed aspects to her that made her look at him with different eyes. The first thing Persephone noticed was how the underworld, despite being ruled by death and darkness, had an order, a structure that she didn't find on the surface. Hades wasn't just the lord of the dead, but a just ruler who took care of his domain with meticulous attention. Every soul in the underworld had its place, and somehow that brought peace. He took her to several places, showing her the Elysian fields, where the souls of the righteous rested in peace, surrounded by fields of glowing flowers. She couldn't help but be amazed by the serenity of that place, a paradise amid the darkness. Hades watched her with a watchful eye, but didn't force her to do anything. "I am not a tyrant, Persephone," he said one time as they walked through a garden of flowers that seemed to have a life of their own. "The dead do not need to fear here. They are at peace." Persephone didn't know what to think. How could she understand someone like Hades? He who ruled death, who was beyond the reach of mortals, now seemed so human, so touchable. His gaze, which once seemed sober and distant, was now starting to open up to her in a way she hadn't expected. One night, as they gazed at the starless sky, Hades came closer and with a gentle gesture touched one of the glowing flowers surrounding the garden. "There is beauty even here," he said, with a lightness in his voice that Persephone hadn't expected. "Sometimes the things that seem the darkest hold the greatest secrets." His words touched her deeply. She felt a quiet relief in her soul, as if she were finally beginning to understand that the underworld wasn't made up of just pain and fear. Perhaps it was in fact a reflection of her own inner confusion, a space where even death had its own kind of meaning. Day by day, she began to see Hades, not just as the ruler of the underworld, but as someone who, though solitary, wasn't cruel. His gestures, though sparse, had a touch of care, and Persephone began to question the image she had always had of him. Perhaps, as he said, his world wasn't as dark as she had thought. And so, something in her heart began to change. She still missed her mother, the light of the world above, but Hades started to stop being the villain of her story and slowly became a presence she was beginning to connect with. There was something in him, something deep and true, that was starting to make sense to her. And that scared her more than anything she had ever had to face. Persephone's transformation in the underworld was palpable. She was beginning to understand her new home, with all its shadows and mysteries. Meanwhile, Hades, who had once seemed distant, started to open up a little more, sharing parts of his story with her and showing her the more intimate corners of his realm. It was on one of those quiet afternoons when the cold wind of the underworld softly blew through the cracks in the caves that Hades took her to a small secret garden. There, rare and mysterious flowers bloomed in colors that Persephone had never imagined seeing in such a place. With each petal, a faint light detached, illuminating the space with a soft glow. Hades stopped in front of a tree laden with red, glowing fruits. Persephone approached, fascinated, and he watched her with a subtle smile, something she wasn't yet accustomed to seeing on him. "These are pomegranate seeds," Hades said with a calmness she had started to recognize as part of his nature. "A symbol of life and death, of transition. I want you to have them." Not fully understanding the meaning of the gesture, but touched by the gentleness with which he offered her the gift, Persephone took one of the seeds. The vibrant color of the fruit seemed inviting, mysterious, and at the same time, deeply symbolic. Hades knew something would happen, but he didn't speak of the consequences yet. "Like everything in this kingdom, they have their own cycle," he explained. "What is born must die, and what dies will always find a way to be reborn." Persephone held the seed in her hands, contemplating it for a moment. Her gaze lifted to Hades, and something in those eyes made her realize that he wasn't just offering a simple gift, but something much deeper. He was, in a way, asking her to connect with this new cycle, with this new phase of her life. She hesitated for a moment, but curiosity, the need to understand more about her own destiny, led her to take a small, hesitant bite of the seed. The sweet and tart flavor filled her mouth, and for a second she felt something strange, as if a renewing energy had passed through her. Hades watched her silently, as if waiting for her reaction. Persephone felt a mix of intense emotions, but at the same time, something new was born inside her, something that connected her more deeply with the underworld and with Hades himself. But she didn't yet know what this small action meant. What she did know, however, was that by accepting that gift, she had taken an irreversible step. The cycle of life and death had begun to take shape within her, and her destiny somehow was irrevocably intertwined with Hades' dark realm. Persephone's gesture of accepting the pomegranate seed wasn't just a symbolic act. It began to trigger changes in the underworld itself. When she bit into the fruit, something deep and almost magical happened. Hades' realm, always dark and secluded, seemed for an instant to react to her presence in a new way. It was as if the underworld, once unchanging, felt that something out of the ordinary was happening. At first, the changes were subtle. The rare flowers she had seen in the secret garden began to grow more exuberantly, their colors becoming more intense, as if responding to Persephone's touch. The waters of the river Styx, which had once flowed silently and murkily, began to shimmer with a faint silvery glow. Hades, ever watchful, silently observed these transformations. "Something has changed, hasn't it?" he said, a slight tone of surprise in his voice as he watched the garden bloom more vibrantly. Persephone looked around, amazed. The underworld seemed more alive, more vibrant, and a unique energy began to emanate from the place. Death and darkness, though still present, were now accompanied by a kind of renewal, a promise of rebirth. "I don't know what's happening," Persephone admitted, gently touching a flower that now radiated a soft, welcoming light. "But it's like a part of me has awakened." Hades looked at her, a look of admiration in his eyes. "That's your strength, Persephone. The underworld responds to you in a way it never responded to anyone before. It's not just your presence, but something within you, something that connects life and death, the end and the beginning. You are the bridge between the two worlds." What Hades said seemed to make sense, but it was still hard for Persephone to fully understand. She was transforming, and the place around her was transforming with her. The underworld was no longer just a realm of lost and condemned souls. It was a place of possibilities, a space where things could bloom and be reborn. Over time, Hades began to realize that this change wasn't just in his gardens or his waters, but in his very being. He, who had always seen himself as the sovereign of darkness, now felt a different force within him, something he didn't know if he wanted, but could no longer ignore. He was becoming something more, not just the ruler of the end, but someone who was, for the first time, seeing the beauty in the beginning of everything. "I never thought I'd see the underworld in such a different way," Hades said to Persephone as they walked through a field of newly bloomed flowers. "You're changing everything here, and maybe you're changing me too." Persephone smiled, feeling more connected to him than ever before, but also to the world around her. Death and life were more intertwined than she had ever imagined. And there, in this realm that had once seemed so dark to her, she began to see a new meaning, a balance between opposites, a promise of renewal. The underworld was transforming before her eyes, and she felt that somehow it had a lot to do with her. As the underworld bloomed in unexpected ways, the world above the earth slowly sank into dark chaos. Persephone's absence did not go unnoticed. Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, was not just sad, she was devastated. Her daughter, her light, her source of joy, had disappeared without a trace. The emptiness she felt in her heart was deep, like a black hole consuming her each day, without her daughter to guide her. Demeter withdrew from her duties to the world. She turned away from the fields and from mortals, leaving the earth to its own fate. The seeds that should have sprouted and grown withered under the weight of her grief. The trees lost their leaves. The fields that had once been golden with wheat became barren, and the wind that once carried the sweet scent of flowers now blew cold and empty. The mortal world began to feel the effects quickly. The crops failed, and rivers dried up, as if nature itself had stopped functioning without Demeter's touch. Despair took over the villages. The humans, who relied on the goddess's generosity for prosperity, began to perish from hunger. Even the gods, watching from afar, started to worry about the fate of the mortals. "This can't go on," said Athena, her voice firm as she watched the chaos from her high throne on Mount Olympus. "The earth is dying, and with it all of our followers. We need to do something." Zeus, who always had his eyes on balance, knew the situation was spiraling out of control. The earth was deteriorating in a way he had never seen before, and not just because of Demeter's grief, but because of the lack of action. Without her daughter, Demeter had become a shadow of what she once was, and that was directly affecting the fertility of the earth. "I know what needs to be done," Zeus replied, his expression grim. "We're going to have to solve this, once and for all." The pressure was immense, and the tension in Olympus was palpable. The gods knew Zeus's intervention was necessary, but not everyone agreed with what he had in mind. Demeter, in her pain, refused to yield, and without an agreement between them, the balance between the worlds would continue to crumble. Somewhere deep in the underworld, Hades watched the earth with silent eyes. He knew Demeter was suffering and chaos was spreading, but his connection to the situation was complicated. He felt that what was happening to the earth was, in part, a consequence of his actions. And as Persephone adapted to her new role as Queen of the Underworld, Hades began to realize that in some way he was also part of this great web of intertwined destinies. As much as he wished to keep Persephone by his side, he knew he couldn't let the world above succumb completely. Demeter's pain was visible, and the suffering of her mortal children was reaching proportions that couldn't be ignored. Persephone, now immersed in the energy of her new realm, began to understand the depth of the pain her mother was going through. Hades beside her watched her with a deep, thoughtful look. He knew that soon he would need to make a choice. He didn't want to lose the woman he was beginning to understand and admire, but he also didn't want to be the one responsible for seeing the earth plunge completely into darkness. The winds of the underworld and the surface world were converging, and the balance between life and death, light and darkness, was about to be decided. What would happen in the coming days, no one could predict. But Persephone's fate The key to the salvation or damnation of the world was becoming clearer by the moment. The situation on Earth had reached a critical point. Demeter, consumed by the grief of loss and the pain of seeing the world crumble around her, was becoming more and more isolated. There were no more crops to harvest, no more blessings for mortals. The earth, once fertile and generous, was now dry and cold, lifeless. The animals fled, and the humans looked to the sky in fear, waiting for some miracle. Hunger spread like a dark shadow, covering everything. It was at this moment that Helios, the god of the sun, approached Demeter. He had been watching everything unfold, concerned for the fate of the mortals and the devastation sweeping the world. He knew that, for everything to have started falling apart, something had happened in the underworld, and he knew exactly what it was. "Demeter," Helios said, his voice resonating softly in the warm wind of his golden chariot. "I saw what happened to your daughter." Demeter looked at him with tired eyes, her expression hard and tense. "What do you know?" she asked, already bracing for the worst. Helios sighed, knowing the truth was something Demeter didn't want to hear, but it needed to be said. He was the god of the sun, and he observed everything that happened, from the most intimate to the most distant. He knew that without the intervention of her daughter, the crops couldn't be restored, and the balance was lost. Hades took Persephone to the underworld. "I saw it all, Demeter. He kidnapped her, and now she's with him, ruling by his side." The air grew heavy and cold, as if the earth itself had stagnated. Demeter, who had instinctively known her daughter was somewhere far away, now had the confirmation she feared. Rage and desperation overtook her, and the pain deep in her chest turned into an overwhelming fury. "How dare he?" Demeter screamed, the words filled with fury and pain. "How could he do this? She's my daughter. No one takes her from me." She turned abruptly, looking to the sky as if searching for some explanation, some sign that would help her understand. Desperation was replaced by the need for justice. She wouldn't rest until she had her daughter back, no matter the cost. Helios, seeing Demeter's fury, knew that the battle ahead would be difficult. The goddess of the earth was out of her mind, and there was no stopping her. She would demand a solution, and soon the gods of Olympus would be forced to deal with the consequence of Hades, defying not only Demeter's will, but the very balance between the worlds. "The truth is already revealed, Demeter. Now what will you do with it?" Helios said, his tone grave but filled with understanding. Demeter didn't answer immediately. Her mind was on fire, and her will, stronger than ever, began to take shape. She knew she couldn't continue allowing the earth to die, and more importantly, she couldn't let Hades, even as ruler of the underworld, destroy the one thing she loved most, her daughter. She would make a radical decision. "Zeus!" Demeter shouted, her power resonating throughout Olympus. "Let him hear me, or the earth will never see the light of day again." It was a declaration of war, a threat as old as Olympus itself. And with that, Demeter prepared to fight not only for her daughter, but for the very existence of life on Earth. The pressure on Olympus had never been so intense. The sky, which once shone with the colors of the sun and serenity, was now covered in dark, heavy clouds, a direct reflection of Demeter's anguish. She was at the end of her patience, and her pain had turned into a rage that resonated throughout the earth, and even the gods could feel the force of her determination. Demeter, with her dark beauty and the palpable energy of a grieving mother, had lost the tranquility and diplomacy she once had. In her heart, she had only one desire: to return her daughter. The world was disintegrating before her eyes, and she knew that Hades had to pay for what he had done. He couldn't just take Persephone and expect things to continue as if nothing had happened. She approached Zeus' throne, her eyes burning with fury. Her steps were heavy, echoing through the grand hall of Olympus, as if the very universe was about to bow before her rage. "Zeus, can you hear me now?" Her voice sounded firm and authoritative, making all the gods present in the hall shrink back slightly. "I demand that you return my daughter to me, or this world will be doomed." Zeus, the great lord of Olympus, looked at her with a dark expression, understanding the gravity of the situation. He knew that Demeter wasn't making an empty threat. She had the power to stop everything, to destroy everything, even the very balance of nature itself. The chaos in her heart was as vast as the emptiness the earth now faced. "I know, Demeter, that your pain is immense," Zeus replied, his voice calm but carrying a painful weight. "But you cannot destroy the world to get what you want. Hades, he has his own reasons, his own vision of what it means to rule. This situation is not simple." Demeter interrupted him, her eyes blazing with the intensity of a storm. "Don't come at me with talks of balance and peace, Zeus. You allowed him to take my daughter. You and all the others saw it happen and did nothing. Now you will give me a solution, or the earth will be ruined forever. I will not care for anything until Persephone is returned to my side." Zeus felt the weight of the threat in her words. Demeter wasn't just demanding something from her brother, she was ready to bring destruction to the world if she wasn't satisfied. The crops were drying up each day, mortals were on the brink of despair, and Demeter's fury was starting to echo throughout every corner of Olympus. There was no time to hesitate anymore. With a deep sigh, Zeus understood that he could no longer delay. He would have to act, even if it meant displeasing everyone, even Hades. "I will do what I can to resolve this, Demeter. I'll send Hermes to the underworld to negotiate with Hades." Zeus looked at all the gods gathered, who were silent, aware of the gravity of what was happening. "But this will be done my way." Demeter did not calm down but listened attentively. She knew that with the pressure she had placed, Zeus was now committed to finding a solution. She was willing to wait, but she would not bend. Her ultimatum was clear. Either her daughter would return home, or she would let the earth fall into eternal darkness. With a firm gesture, Zeus rose from his throne and, without another word, motioned for Hermes to prepare for the mission that would change the fates of all. Olympus knew that a new chapter was about to be written, and the outcome of this story was still undecided. The tension in Olympus was at its peak, and Zeus's decision was swift but not without regret. He knew that in normal times this mission would be difficult, but now, with Demeter threatening to keep the earth desolate, he had no choice but to act. With a firm gesture, he called Hermes, the most agile and persuasive of the gods, known for his ability to cross realms and handle any situation with cunning and speed. Hermes, with his winged sandals and shimmering cloak, appeared before Zeus in the blink of an eye, ready to fulfill his mission, as always. "Zeus, I'm here, as always, ready for any task you give me. What do you need?" Hermes asked, his voice cheerful and full of energy. Zeus looked at the messenger with a rare seriousness. He knew that this task would require more than just cunning and speed. It was an emotional challenge, a delicate balance between Demeter's desires and Hades' wishes. He had to be careful with every word. "Hermes, I need you to go to the underworld. Talk to Hades and try to bring Persephone back to her mother. It won't be easy, as we know Hades wants her by his side, but this situation must be resolved once and for all. The earth cannot continue to wither, and Demeter is determined to take this to the extreme." Hermes tilted his head, absorbing Zeus's words. He knew the underworld wasn't a simple place, and negotiating with Hades was always a risky task. Hades wasn't easily convinced, and his possessiveness over Persephone was well known, but at the same time, Hermes also knew that Persephone's goodwill could be the key to resolving this without further conflict. "I understand, Zeus. I'll go immediately, but what if Hades refuses? What should I do then? Hermes asked, a nervous smile on his face, already anticipating the complexity of the mission. Zeus looked at him with a grave expression. You'll do what's necessary, Hermes. You're the only one who can handle this situation without causing a direct conflict. Find a solution that's fair to both sides. If that means negotiating or even using your persuasion to soften their hearts, so be it. But remember, we can't let this drag on any longer. Persephone needs to come home. With a nod, Hermes prepared to depart. He knew that, regardless of the difficulties, his unique ability to navigate between worlds could ensure the best outcome for everyone. With a snap of his fingers, he launched himself toward the underworld, crossing the dark gates of death with ease, with one clear mission in mind: to restore the balance between the gods, secure peace, and above all, bring Persephone back to her mother. As he entered the underworld, Hermes was enveloped by darkness, but his presence lit the way. He knew exactly where to find Hades, and with every step, the weight of the task became more real. He knew that while he had his mission, he also had to navigate the emotional complexities of everyone involved. The underworld was a vast, gloomy place, where even the winds seemed to carry the weight of eternal sorrow. Hades, sitting on his obsidian throne, watched the movement of souls passing through his domain, but his mind was far from there. Persephone, the young woman he had kidnapped, still dominated his thoughts, her beauty and purity impressing him every day. What had begun as an overwhelming passion was turning into a bond Hades didn't know how to handle. He knew his love for Persephone was not simple. Hades, the ruler of the underworld, the feared and distant god, now found himself consumed by a deep desire to have the young woman by his side forever. He knew she wasn't happy in that place, but she was starting to adjust, exploring the corners of the underworld and even showing an unexpected interest in his dark realm. But at the same time, Persephone's presence also created a silent pain. Inside him, a pain Hades would never reveal, not even to himself. When Hermes arrived with his agile figure and usual smile, Hades immediately knew the messenger was bringing a direct message from Zeus. The tension in the air was palpable, and Hades felt the weight of the situation growing with every passing moment. Hermes, with his casual tone, but still serious, approached Hades' throne and greeted him with a courteous gesture, though he knew the conversation that would follow wouldn't be a simple one. Hades, great lord of the underworld, Zeus has sent me with a mission. Hermes spoke softly, but Hades' eyes watched him with an unsettling intensity. Hades looked at him, his dark, deep eyes like the abysses of the underworld itself. He was used to dealing with gods and heroes, but this kind of conversation challenged him in a way he didn't know how to control. What does Zeus want now? Hades' voice was low, carrying a subtle threat, as if each word was imbued with the weight of his authority. Hermes took a step forward, trying to lighten the atmosphere with a nervous laugh, but soon became serious. Zeus wants Persephone to return to her mother, Demeter. The world above is dying, and Demeter won't stop until her daughter is brought back. The balance of nature has shattered, and the earth is in ruins. The pressure on Zeus and all of us is immense. Hades, upon hearing Hermes' words, felt a tightness in his chest. He looked into the emptiness in front of him for a moment, reflecting deeply. There was something that kept him there, something he couldn't simply ignore. He had Persephone, but he knew that for her own good, it might be better to let her return. But at the same time, the fear of losing her consumed him. The underworld without her would be a cold, empty cave, and he knew his life would be colorless without her presence. The decision was not simple. Hades felt that the bond between them was deepening, but he also knew he couldn't force her to stay. She had the right to be with her mother, to live in the world of light and fertile land, as she had always been destined to. Hermes, you don't understand. Hades paused, his gaze turning to the depths of the abyss where shadows danced. I love her. I've never felt this before. I know she doesn't belong entirely to this place, but what she means to me. I don't know if I can let her go so easily. Hermes, seeing the internal conflict of Hades, realized that he wasn't just dealing with the loss of Persephone, but with the pain of an impossible love, something he had never known how to experience. Hades wasn't a god who showed weakness, but here he was, vulnerable like never before. I understand, Hades. No one can change what they feel, but you have to think about what's best for her. She's a goddess of spring. She belongs to the world of light and the earth. You brought her into your realm, but that can't be the solution to everything. She deserves the freedom to choose where she wants to be. Hades looked at Hermes, his face heavy and thoughtful. He knew deep down that Hermes was right. But the dilemma remained. Letting Persephone go would mean losing a part of himself. With a deep sigh, Hades finally rose from his throne, the decision taking shape in his heart. He knew that no matter how hard it was, true love should never be selfish. Do what you have to, Hermes. If Zeus demands that she return, then so be it. But know that if she leaves, I will never be the same. Hermes gave a slight nod, and with his mission fulfilled, he prepared to depart. But before leaving the underworld, he glanced at Hades one last time, as if feeling not only the god's pain, but also the pain of the balance that was about to be restored. I'll make sure she knows how much you respect her, Hades. Until later. And with that, the messenger disappeared into the shadows, leaving Hades alone, his heart heavy, but the decision made. He knew that from now on, everything would change, but perhaps deep down, it was exactly what Persephone needed to find her own path. The underworld, with its dark caves and vast stone halls, had never been so silent. Hades' decision was made, and Persephone's farewell was about to happen. He loved her, but he knew that true love couldn't be forced. It couldn't be kept for oneself. Persephone should be free to return to the world of light from where she came, and he knew he couldn't stop her from following her destiny. But there was something deeply troubling him. The memory of the pomegranate seeds, the ones he had given her at the beginning of her stay in the underworld, lingered in his mind like a distant whisper. He didn't know if it had been just a symbolic gift or something deeper, but the fact was that the moment she consumed them, an unbreakable bond was formed between them. She was now tied to the underworld in a way he didn't fully understand. When Hermes arrived, bringing the news of Zeus's final decision, Hades was in his private chambers, observing the pomegranates ripening in one of the underworld's gardens. He didn't know how this seemingly simple fruit could be so important to everything that was happening, but now, with Persephone's imminent departure, he felt the weight of that small gesture of affection becoming a permanent mark. Hades, what will we do now? Hermes asked, his voice tinged with a hint of concern. He knew that the plan to return Persephone to Demeter wouldn't be easy, and there was something strange about the whole situation. I don't know, Hermes, Hades replied in a low voice, almost as if speaking to himself. Persephone is no longer completely mine. She left her mother, but she's still here, with a piece of the underworld in her heart. Hermes looked at him, uncomfortable with the melancholy overflowing from his tone. He knew that the bond between them was stronger than anyone could understand, and Hades seemed to carry it as an invisible burden. But there was something more there. Hermes could feel it in the air. Something wasn't right. It was then that Hades, with an almost imperceptible gesture, indicated the pomegranates blooming in the garden. You know, Hermes, that what she ate here, something as simple as a fruit, now keeps her tied to this place. She ate the pomegranate seeds, and whoever eats from the underworld must remain in it. A deep bond was formed, and it can't be broken easily, not without consequences. Hermes blinked, surprised by the revelation. He had never imagined that something so trivial could have such a profound power, but now he understood. The pomegranate. Seeds weren't just a gift, they were a key. And this key would now keep Persephone torn between two worlds, her mother's world and her husband's. However, Hermes knew that what was done couldn't be undone. Persephone would return to her mother, but not completely. She had already consumed something of the underworld, and that would change everything. This meant that she would never be fully of the upper world, but also not entirely of the underworld. The reality of the situation began to form more clearly for Hermes. He looked at Hades, who seemed darker than ever. Hades, are you aware that the seeds she ate keep her here, in some way, even if she moves away? She can't be completely free, can she? Hermes asked, his words carrying an unexpected sadness. Hades stepped forward, his expression deep and distant. I know, Hermes. I know that now she belongs to both worlds. When she leaves, a part of her will stay with me forever, like the seeds she ate. She will never be completely mine, but she will never be completely Demeter's either. The underworld and the world of earth have shaped her in ways even she cannot comprehend, and so Persephone's fate was sealed. She would return to her mother, but she would always carry with her the shadow of the underworld, like an invisible mark. Hades knew that their farewell would only be temporary, but to him, every moment without her would be an eternity. As Hermes prepared to bring the news to Zeus, Hades was left alone, watching the pomegranates ripening in the light of his dark kingdom. He knew that, although Persephone's departure was inevitable, the promise that she would return still sustained him. And perhaps, with time, the love between them would find a way to reconcile with the laws of the gods and the worlds. But in that moment, he simply sighed, aware that the future was now in his hands, and Persephone's fate was written in the eternal cycle of the seasons, a reminder that true love is both a blessing and a curse. The winds of the underworld felt heavier than usual that morning. Hades walked with long strides through the dark corridors of his realm, his gaze lost in the black horizon stretching before him. Although the shadows were his home, a weight greater than any darkness surrounded him. The thought that Persephone would need to leave, even if it was only for half the year, left him in an indescribable state of melancholy. He knew that her fate was out of his hands, but what troubled him most was what she would take with her. A part of her being and a part of him too. It was in this state of inner conflict that Hermes arrived again at Hades' palace, his golden wings shining in contrast to the darkness. The messenger of the gods was not here for a casual visit, but for a critical mission. He brought with him a proposal that seemed to have no alternative, a proposal from Zeus. Hades, Hermes began, his voice firm, yet not without a hint of sympathy. Zeus has come to a conclusion. What will be done with Persephone must be resolved among all of us. You know that you can't keep her forever, but you also can't let her go without consequences. So the solution he offers is this: an agreement. Hades stopped walking and looked at the messenger. His gaze, though serious, was attentive. He knew the balance between the underworld and the world of the living was delicate, and Zeus's proposal would not be simple. What does Zeus propose? Hades asked, already imagining that what was coming would be something he wouldn't like, but would have to accept. Hermes took a deep breath before speaking, as if weighing each word. The proposal is that Persephone spend half the year with Demeter and half with you. When she is with her mother, the earth will bloom and be filled with abundance. When she returns to you, the world of the living will suffer the loss of the harvest and plunge into winter and darkness. Silence fell over the underworld, heavy as a rock. Hades knew that this agreement, though balanced, implied a continuous separation from Persephone. Each time she left for the world of light, he would feel her absence like a wound that would never heal. And yet he knew he had no choice. It was this or lose Persephone forever. Zeus is right, Hades finally said with a heavy sigh. The balance must be maintained, and Persephone's well-being is the only thing that matters. If this is the agreement to ensure she has her freedom and her place in both the world of the living and the dead, then I will accept. Hermes nodded, relieved. He knew that this agreement wouldn't please Hades, but he also knew there was no other path to follow. Hades's love for Persephone was deep and complex, and this commitment to half the year with her was what remained for him to keep her close, even if just for part of the time. So it's decided, Hermes said with a gentle smile. Persephone will return to Demeter, but she will come back to you, and the earth will thus know the cycle of the seasons. Winter will come whenever she leaves, and spring will bloom when she returns. Hades looked into the void, feeling a mix of sadness and acceptance. He knew that true love sometimes requires sacrifices, and this was the greatest of them. But at the same time, he also felt a kind of peace. The love he felt for Persephone would never be a prison, but rather a connection, a partnership between two different worlds. He accepted that as difficult as it was, this agreement was what would bring balance to both, to her, to the earth, and even to him. So be it, Hades said, his voice now softer, but firm. Let the cycle of the seasons begin. Let her return to her mother, and let spring bloom when she returns. What is for her good will be my way. And so, the agreement between the gods was sealed. Persephone, the queen of the underworld and the goddess of spring, would now live between two worlds, serving as the bridge between light and darkness, life and death, bringing with her the eternal cycle of renewal that would forever mark the earth's seasons. The underworld, in turn, anxiously awaited the return of the young woman who now carried within her heart the duality of the realms. Hades gazed at the horizon once more, sensing that even in the darkness, something beautiful was forming. The agreement was a pain, but also a promise that despite the separation, the love between him and Persephone would never be broken. She was his, and he was hers, and together, in their own time, their worlds would unite again. When the news reached Demeter's realm, the goddess couldn't contain the joy that overflowed from her heart. Her daughter would return to her after months of anguish and despair. The agreement between the gods had been made, and finally, Persephone would return to the surface, to the world of plants and light. The earth, which had been silent and dark for so long, was now preparing to celebrate the return of the goddess, who brought with her fertility and abundance. The moment of their reunion was like a dream becoming reality. Demeter, with her heart tight with emotion, climbed the hill leading to the portal between the underworld and the world of mortals. When the portal opened and Persephone appeared, the rays of sunlight that lit the sky seemed more intense, as if the universe itself were celebrating the return of the young goddess. Persephone's gaze met her mother's, and before any words were spoken, they embraced, a silent but profound connection that said more than any speech could express. "My daughter," Demeter said, her voice choked with emotion. "The earth has missed you. I have missed you." Persephone smiled, but something in her eyes showed the longing for the underworld, for Hades's realm. She knew she was returning to her mother and the world of light, but her heart still carried the weight of the separation. "I miss you too, mother," Persephone replied, touching Demeter's face. "But just as the earth regenerates, I have also transformed. I am now a part of both worlds, and the change I feel within me is something I never imagined the earth around them seemed to understand the message. Flowers sprouted quickly, covered in vibrant colors, while the fields that had once been dry began to glow with life. The trees bore abundant fruit, and the rivers flowed more strongly, as if celebrating the union of the two goddesses. Spring, with its renewing power, took over the world, bringing hope and prosperity to all. Demeter, with a radiant smile, watched the fields around her. She knew that her daughter brought with her something magical, something she could never give on her own. She was the source of the earth's fertility, but Persephone was the key to the eternal cycle of life, the link between life and death, between light and darkness. You brought rebirth with you, Demeter said, looking at the blooming field. Every step you take on the earth makes everything around you bloom. You are more than a goddess of spring. You are the reason the world will never stop growing. Persephone, with a look of wisdom and serenity, caressed a wildflower beside her. She knew that her true mission now was not just to rule the underworld or bring spring. She had become the bridge between the two worlds, a symbol of balance. And as much as she loved her mother and the world of light, she also knew that part of her heart would always remain with Hades. I am the earth and the shadow, she said softly, with a smile that mixed the joy of the present and the sadness of one who knew her journey was divided. But while I'm here, I will make the earth bloom. And when I return to the underworld, Hades will know that my heart never abandoned him. The wind passing through the trees seemed to agree with her words, and the birds singing in the distance were like a reminder that the balance she maintained between the worlds was what allowed life to continue. Demeter and Persephone spent the day together, celebrating the goddess's return, tending to the plants, and watching the earth bloom around them. The flowers were more beautiful than ever, and the harvest would be the best in many years. The cycle of the seasons had completed, and the world now experienced the renewal that came with Persephone's return. Spring had finally returned, but while Demeter gave herself over to the embrace of renewal and joy, part of Persephone looked toward the horizon, where the underworld awaited her, anticipating her departure in the next winter. She knew her journey was far from over. She would walk between the two worlds, feeling with every step the force of the balance she herself represented. The earth would bloom while she was there, but upon her departure, darkness would take over, and the cycle would continue forever. The cycle of the seasons became more than just a simple change in the weather. It was now a cosmic dance, reflecting the deep balance between life and death, between light and darkness. When Persephone left the surface and descended to the underworld, Demeter sank into sadness, and the world around her reflected her pain. The winds grew colder, the trees lost their leaves, and the earth became covered in a heavy mist, as if the world itself had given in to mourning. During autumn, when the leaves fell and winter approached, men saw the earth drain of its color. The fields, once alive and full, were now covered by a blanket of ice and snow. Demeter, with her heart tight from missing her daughter, remained in her temple, in silence, waiting for the day Persephone would return. The earth became barren, food scarce, and hunger began to be a part of mortal life. It was a time of darkness and mourning. The cold, biting wind seemed to carry the sorrow of Demeter, and the people felt the scarcity in the fields and plantations. They knew that the reason for this cruel winter was the absence of Persephone, but they also knew that it was only temporary. Just as Demeter's sadness, the winter would give way, and spring would bring renewal and hope. When the moment arrived and Persephone returned, the earth reacted immediately. Flowers began to bloom, trees sprouted new leaves, and the fields were filled with life. Winter gave way to the light of spring, and nature celebrated the goddess's return. as if her presence was the very breath of life that brought back the cycle of abundance. The seasons changed as if the entire universe understood that from that moment on, life and death coexisted, always in motion, always renewing. Spring became vibrant, with intense colors and sweet fragrances, reflecting the very heart of Persephone. The earth flourished in her presence, and Demeter, with the smile of a mother who sees her daughter return, took over the fields again, filling the world with the fruits and colors of life. However, when Persephone descended to the underworld, nature felt her departure. The warmth and light of spring gradually dissipated, giving way to the coldness of Demeter's sorrow. It was as if the whole world entered a state of rest, waiting for the young goddess's return to restore its vitality. The truth was that for the cycle to continue, for life to have meaning, and for death to be just a stage of renewal, Persephone needed to spend half of the year in both worlds. Her presence in the underworld symbolized death, but also the promise of rebirth. When she was in Hades' realm, the earth rested, but when she returned to the light, the world was again filled with life. Demeter, understanding the deep connection between separation and return, realized that her pain was also an essential part of the cycle. She knew that winter was only a time of waiting, of transformation, for life to begin anew. And over time, she learned to accept her daughter's absence as part of a natural process. Meanwhile, Persephone, even in the underworld, missed her mother, but also knew that the balance between the two worlds was crucial. Every time she returned to the surface, she felt stronger, more connected to the power of nature and the eternal cycle of life. But when she descended to the underworld, she knew that her role there was also essential. She was the guardian of balance, the bridge between life and death, between the past and the future. And so, the cycle of the seasons continued. The leaves fell, the snow covered the earth, but there was always the promise that when the right time came, spring would bloom again. Life, like the love between Persephone and Demeter, followed its endless dance, always intertwined with the rhythms of nature. Over the years, Persephone transformed, not just in the seasons, but in her essence. She was no longer just Demeter's daughter or the sweet goddess of spring who brought flowers and fruits to the earth. Now, she was also the queen of the underworld, the mistress of a dark and deep realm where the souls of the dead traveled to find rest. During her stays in the underworld, Persephone deepened her relationship with Hades. She began to understand the mystery of the realm of shadows, the importance of justice and peace between the souls. Although the underworld was a place of sadness and solitude, it also held its own type of beauty, a silent and eternal beauty that never revealed itself immediately, but slowly unfolded in small things. The silence, the echo of the souls, chains, the glow of jewels made from precious stones, all of it became part of Persephone's spirit. The young goddess, who had once been only a symbol of youth and vibrant life, now also displayed a deep wisdom that transcended her youth. She felt as though her presence in the underworld was a gift, not just for the souls that dwelled there, but also for herself. Each visit to the underworld was a moment of introspection and growth, where she learned to understand the complexities of death, the value of eternal rest, and the balance it brought to the world. But when Persephone returned to the surface, it was impossible not to feel the impact of her arrival. The world rejoiced at her return, and Demeter, though always with a trace of sadness from the separation, received her daughter with the joy of one who knows that life renews, and that death is not an end, but only a pause. The flowers bloomed again quickly. The trees turned green, the fields filled with grains and fruits, and all that was dry and scarce transformed into abundance. In this balance, Persephone came to be seen not only as a goddess of spring, but as the embodiment of the cycle of life. one that involves death and rebirth, darkness and light, sorrow and happiness. She became both the queen of the underworld, ruling with serenity and wisdom, and the goddess of spring, bringing with her light and renewal. She was the link between worlds, representing the coexistence of good and evil, light and shadows. People who had known only the springtime side of Persephone began to understand her duality. They saw the flowers that bloomed with her arrival, but they also knew that when she left, the leaves fell and the earth rested. It was a natural process, no longer seen as a loss, but as a reminder of what life truly meant, a constant cycle of rebirth and transformation. Death was only a part of the journey, a necessary part for true renewal to take place. And so, over time, Persephone became one of the most powerful goddesses in Greek mythology. Her presence in both realms not only balanced nature, but also taught both mortals and gods the importance of accepting the cycle of life. In her domain of the underworld, she became a figure of respect, ruling with wisdom and showing that even in a realm of shadows there could be beauty, peace, and a certain kind of life. Her mystical, mysterious, and deep nature made her an almost untouchable figure, but at the same time, her connection to spring made her approachable, full of compassion and warmth. Persephone, with her inner queen and vibrant goddess, became the bridge between the worlds, teaching all that for life to bloom, it was necessary to accept the presence of death and darkness. And so she became not just the queen of the underworld and the goddess of spring, but an eternal symbol of balance and renewal, representing the endless dance of life and death. The story of Hades and Persephone spread to all corners of the earth, not just among the gods, but also among humans. The cycle of life, death, and rebirth that accompanied them became an essential teaching for those who inhabited the mortal world. Ancient myths were never just stories, but profound lessons about what it meant to live and die, about the balance of the forces of nature and how the choices of the gods influenced the fate of all. As centuries passed, the seasons became synonymous with more than just weather. They were seen as a reflection of the emotions and events of the gods. When spring bloomed with Persephone, the lands became fertile and full of life, and when she went to the underworld, the leaves fell, and winter brought with it a pause for the cycle to restart. Every harvest, every season, was a reminder that life, though fleeting, followed a course that was beyond the understanding of mortals. The love between Hades and Persephone, though it began with a kidnapping and a somewhat dubious request for permission, became one of the most powerful and revered unions in mythology. It was not just the reflection of a union between two powerful entities, but the symbol of a deep understanding of the forces that govern existence, the need to face death for life to have meaning, and the balance that must exist between light and darkness. Mortals, upon reflecting on the myth, began to see more than just the story of a kidnapped goddess. They saw in Persephone's cycle a reflection of their own journey. Everyone at some point faces loss, feels the pain of separation, but like nature, must always find a way to renew themselves, to rise from the ashes and move forward. For the ancient Greeks, Persephone's legacy wasn't just a love story, but also a lesson in accepting fate. She embodied the flow of life and death itself, and people came to revere her story as a reminder that what is lost is never truly forgotten, that death is merely a transformation, a transition to something new. In culture and celebrations, the myth of Persephone lived on in rituals and festivals that celebrated the return of spring and the renewal of the earth. People gathered to celebrate the blooming of flowers and the fertility of the harvest, thanking the goddess for the abundance she brought. And in darker times, when the land fell into a frozen slumber, they also honored the role of Hades, who, ruled the underworld with wisdom and respect. Even today, though the stories of ancient gods may seem distant, Persephone's legacy remains present in many aspects of human life. She has become a metaphor for those facing loss, pain, and sorrow, reminding them that there is always the possibility of rebirth, always a chance to start anew. Her story is not just a reminder of ancient times, but a constant reflection on the cycles of life, which continue to repeat, generation after generation. The myth of Hades and Persephone, with its complex love and tension between light and darkness, remains one of the most iconic stories in Greek mythology, and its legacy lives on today. It teaches that life, just like the seasons, is never permanent, but that there is beauty in each phase, in each goodbye and every reunion. And so, the cycle of life and death, spring and winter, will continue forever, like an eternal, endless dance. Thus, the legacy of Persephone and Hades endures to this day, reminding us that life is an eternal cycle of transformations and renewals. The love between them, transcending time and realms, continues to inspire and teach us about the balance between light and shadow. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about mythology, gods, and fascinating stories, don't forget to like, comment below on what you thought, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any content. Hit the notification bell to stay updated on everything. See you next time, where we'll bring more epic stories and mysteries that mark the history of the gods.